Being a self-employed business owner, running your own business can be one of the proudest things that you can do for yourself and your family in your life. It can open up so many doors, so many opportunities, lead to a legacy that your friends, family and customers will benefit from years to come. But it's also one of the loneliest places on earth too. The hours that we work, the time away from people, the pressure that we and our customers put ourselves under, the financial pressures, and what with one thing or another, i.e. a global pandemic, for some, there have been bigger consequences that have been brought out of our need to work from home and our continuous lockdowns that have left many of us staring at the same four walls in a house that used to be a haven and is now more of a prison. I'm Mark Ford, coach, author and editor at Your Best Kept Business Secret, and I want to talk to you about the secret battle that I've been fighting for over a year now, and now it's time to open up and talk about it. Loneliness, and loneliness in business. Now, loneliness is a universal human emotion that is both complex and unique to each and every individual. Because it has no single common cause, the prevention and the treatment of this potentially damaging state of mind can vary dramatically. For example, a lonely child who struggled to make friends at school has different needs than a lonelier adult whose spouse has just recently died. In order to understand loneliness, it's important to take a closer look at exactly what we mean by the term lonely, as well as the various causes, health consequences, symptoms, and potential treatments for loneliness. The definition of loneliness. Now, while common definitions of loneliness describe it as a state of solitude or being alone, loneliness is actually a state of mind. Loneliness is defined by researchers as feeling lonely more than once a week. Loneliness causes people to feel empty, alone, unwanted, unneeded, and people who are lonely often crave human contact, but their state of mind makes it more difficult to form connections with other people. Loneliness, according to many experts, is not necessarily about being alone. Instead, if you feel alone and isolated, then that is how loneliness plays into your state of mind. For example, a businessman might feel lonely despite being surrounded by other business people and other colleagues. A businesswoman beginning their 2-week business trip abroad might feel lonely despite being constantly surrounded by loads of other business people. The causes of loneliness. Now, contributing factors to loneliness include situational variables such as physical isolation, moving to a new location, divorce, the death of someone significant in a person's life can also lead to feelings of loneliness. Additionally, it can be a symptom of things such as depression. Loneliness can also be attributed to internal factors such as low self-esteem. You see, people who lack confidence in themselves often believe that they are unworthy of the attention or regard of other people, which can lead to isolation and chronic loneliness. It can also be attributed to things being totally out of their control, and well, this is where our friend the pandemic has probably come in. It's something that I'm learning to cope with and I'm learning to deal with. You see, here I was running a business which accelerated during lockdown, constant Zoom calls, phone calls, coaching, writing. But as I sat there in my garden towards the end of the day, I was always overcome with a wave of, unrelenting loneliness. I kid you not, the pandemic almost killed me through the sheer loneliness that I felt and have just endured. I love my dog Penfold, but trust me, he is a useless conversationalist, and it's why I needed to look into and research what could happen unless I took steps to try and solve that feeling. But this piece is not about me. See, we all know how stress walks hand in hand, knuckles white with entrepreneurship because of the constant need to put out the fires in front of us. You see, entrepreneurs, after all, crazy enough to believe fighting fires is far more fun than fire prevention. Now, we often look to stress management, exercise more, less sleep, yoga, Pilates, mindfulness as a way to prolong our lives in this madcap life that we've chosen. But we as proud business owners and entrepreneurs never talk about the real silent killer, loneliness. We aren't talking about simply acting alone because we are proud people. Many entrepreneurs start out believing and, more importantly, trusting themselves and themselves alone. After all, entrepreneurship generally comes from a product or an idea sprung from your head, and so a company is uniquely yours. It is a part of you. Now, along the entrepreneurial journey, there are a good number of successes to share with your team, with your stakeholders, your customers, your friends and your family. But there are a ton more failures and setbacks. Few people around you sharing those simply because no one wants to hear about failure. That means you're essentially alone. You can only rely on yourself. And I truly believe that, and perhaps I'm kind of still struggling to control it. And that's tough when solitude can turn to more corrosive loneliness. And that's where the health problems start. You see, loneliness has a wide range of negative effects on both physical and mental health, including alcoholism and drug use, altered brain functions, antisocial behaviour, cardiovascular diseases and strokes, decreased memory and learning, depression and suicide, increased stress levels, poor decision making. And these are not only the areas in which loneliness actually takes its toll. Lonely adults get less exercise than those who are not lonely. Their diet is higher in fat, their sleep is less efficient, and they report more daytime fatigue. Loneliness also disrupts the regulation of cellular processes deep within your body, predisposing yourself to premature aging. Advice is cheap and readily ignored, particularly by the entrepreneurial and proud self-employed set, but I'm going to try anyway. You see, there are ways to avoid loneliness, or at least take away some of its killing power. And here are just a few. Collaborate. Now, whilst your instinct might be to always go it alone, you run the risk of self-imposed isolation, which almost always leads to its close cousin, depression. Rather than isolate yourself, take on a partner or a co-founder. Create a team of people around you. My favourite saying is, you are the sum of the 5 people you are surrounded by. Now, I usually say this when it comes down to being a success or a failure. If you are surrounded by 5 failures, you will fail. If you're surrounded by 5 successful and inspirational people, you'll succeed. So why not when it comes to loneliness too? For one thing, you'll have someone to talk to with who is invested in your success. And second, it gives you the opportunity to get someone with your complementary skills. Maybe you are a tech wizard, so you need someone who is a skilled marketer. Now, true, having a partner sometimes sucks, and you might find that even a founder needs to be fired down the line, but it can also be a wonderfully productive relationship. And I must admit, I've struggled with this. It's in my nature that when something is wrong, I push people away. I always feel that I shouldn't feel a certain way, and if I do, it's my mess that I got into, so it's my mess to get out of, right? Or that I didn't feel kind of important enough, because here's me, a middle-aged single guy away from his family, and that's my fault. See, these guys have families and friends, and that means that I'm down the pecking order. I'm learning to combat those feelings because I've actually learned that it couldn't be further from the truth. CoWork. Now, if you insist on keeping all leadership functions to yourself, well, it might help to work adjacent to people just a bit like you. Instead of operating your business from your kitchen table, spring into renting a desk or an office at a co-working space. There, you can work alone amid a bunch of other companies doing exactly the same thing. It's a great way to meet other people who might be able to help you work out your problems or network with like-minded founders to find funding or business opportunities. Plus, it forces you to put on clean clothes most days, which will also make you a far more desirable business partner. Convert it. Philosopher Tillich's contrast between loneliness and solitude is an instructive one. Theologically, solitude is never really being alone, since the feeling potentially brings you closer to your God. Practically, looking around you, seeing no one and taking that as an opportunity for inner reflection rather than an outer isolation can only be a positive for you. Call it prayer, meditation, or talking to yourself, whatever you want. It always gives your mind the pause it needs to recharge. Be still and know you are not God, but you can create great things too. Cry. I cry. I'm not ashamed of it. On Father's Day, I didn't get to see my son because he was in his bubble with his mum and recently widowed grandfather. And I bawled. We go through a range of emotions, but they really only get us in trouble if we let them manage us rather than the other way around. Loneliness is a feeling, nothing more. After all, you can be lonely in a crowd of friends. Like all feelings, they need to be felt and then addressed. Cry it out. Have that pity party for yourself. Then, wipe your nose and move forward. Get help. Now, depression is the cancer of entrepreneurship, and more business leaders are handling their own mental health issues more effectively. If loneliness is leading to a true mental health condition, find a therapist or a coach. I have, and she is simply amazing. If you just need to talk about where your life or business is heading, hire a coach. If it's a spiritual crisis, find that bar where the priest and the rabbi always seem to walk in. Talk to your mentor. Call your dad, your mum, your brother, your sister, or even give me a holler. The greatest loss that comes from loneliness or depression is perspective. Only someone who isn't you can truly see you without the biases your internal mirrors show us. My experience has been that people generally want to help others, so unburdening is rarely a burden. And that's it for this podcast. I hope you've either learned something or felt motivated to do something about loneliness in business. I'd never presume to tell people how to live their lives, and experience tells me that lonely entrepreneurs are the least likely to listen anyway. But life is too important to spend it lonely. Take a few steps to correct that, and I promise I'll leave you alone. I'm Mark Ford, your best kept business secret. And do you know what? I'll speak to you soon. Take care.